There are a couple of ways you should know how to move layers up and down in the layer stack. First of all, you can use control square brackets and move the active or selected layers up and down. So if I have that red rectangle layer selected and I use command or control square brackets, I can move it up or down. And if I add shift, I can move it to the top of the layer stack or to the bottom of the layer stack. If it's part of a group, then it won't exit the group immediately. It will go to the bottom or the top of the group first, and then it will go to the top or bottom of the layer stack after that. You can of course also drag and move layers around, or you can use the layer arrange options. So here you can find the bring forward, send backward, and also the one send to back and bring to front. So these are the keyboard shortcuts that I mentioned. To duplicate a layer, you can press Command or Control J, and that will create a duplicate version of the selected layer. Or you can also go to Layer and Duplicate Layer. Here you have an additional option that you can choose the destination for the duplicate. In case you have other documents, you can duplicate a layer into those documents, or you can also create a new document. You can even give it a name here. And also another way to duplicate is to Alt click and drag in the layers panel. That means you also create a duplicate version of that selected layer. You have to make sure you really know how to work with smart objects, because there will be at least 2 or 3 questions about them in the exam. So just quickly, a couple of things to make sure you know how to work with them. To access the source of a smart object, you have to double click on the thumbnail of the layer, and then whatever changes you make here will update in the main document. For example, if I add an adjustment layer here to turn this to black and white, then I can save these changes. So I choose save and go back to the main document, and I can see the smart object is now set to black and white. If I create a duplicate of this layer, so I'm just going to hide these layers here, and I'm going to create a duplicate by holding down Alt and click and dragging a layer is also a way to duplicate it. So now I have 2 versions of the smart object, and if I go back and turn off the black and white effect and save the smart object, then I come back here and I can see that both of the instances of the smart object will update automatically. If I want to separate the instances of the smart object, I can right click on a smart object and choose New Smart Object via Copy. In that case, I will have 2 separate sources. So if I go into this one and turn this into black and white, as I did before, and save it, and I go back to the original file, I will see that it will only affect that second smart object, in which I created the black and white adjustment. The main reason why we have smart objects in Photoshop is because whenever you transform pixel layers, you lose quality. And the advantage of smart objects is that you can transform them without directly affecting the quality of the pixels. And you should also know that you can have smart objects inside smart objects. So you can have multiple levels of smart objects as well in one Photoshop document. Now coming back to shape layers, I'm going to turn these layers back on, and there's a couple of things you should also know about them. So for example, you have 2 shape layers and you would like to merge them together. You can do that now by pressing Command or Control E, and that will become one shape layer. But in case you have the same color on both of them, so I'm just going to again have them separate but using the same color, and I select the 2 and press Command E, that means I am going to actually have 2 separate paths combined into a shape layer. And if I have one of them selected and I go to Layer, New, Shape Layer via Cut, I can still separate them and have again 2 separate shape layers of these 2 paths. It's good to have a look at the following options with shape layers. These are the path operations and the path arrangement options. So essentially, whenever you combine shapes, you can decide how they relate to each other. like these two are combined, but I can choose subtract, for example, and then the one on the top will be subtracted from the one below. Or I can also choose intersect, and then there will be only an intersection visible of the two shapes, and so on and so forth. So make sure you look into these two areas of the vector shapes. And last but not least, about adjustment layers, I would like to also show you a couple of things. So for example, here in this document, I'm going to create a hue saturation adjustment layer and change the hue. That will affect everything below the adjustment layer. So if I put this all the way to the top and maybe change my shape layer's color to red, that will also be affected by that purple hue that I set up in the hue saturation adjustment layer. But if I want to constrain the effect to only that vector shape layer, I can alt click between the adjustment layer and the shape layer to create a clipping mask. Again, clipping mask is something I'm going to explain in a following video about masks. Now, just remember that you can constrain the effect of adjustment layers with a clipping mask. You can also use keyboard shortcut to do the same thing. It's Command Alt or Control Alt G to turn something into a clipping mask or to take away the clipping mask. And there's one more thing I would like to show you, and that's if you have layers in a layer group, like an adjustment layer and another smart object or a pixel layer, then you can make sure that the effect of the adjustment layer will only affect the layers in the group, but nothing else below them. To do that, you have to change the blend mode of the group to normal, because by default it's set to pass through. So if you set it to normal, then as you can see, it will only affect the layer inside the group, but not the background. So if I change the layer group back to pass through, for example, then the adjustment layer will be able to affect everything inside and below the group.